the stage. Oh, hold on. Wait a second. Can you guys get her? She's backstage. So sorry about that. You guys are welcome to stay. Everyone, you want to stay and hear this next talk, you guys are welcome. Again, now please welcome Morgen Rochard to the stage.
There you go. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's a lively crowd. Can I get like a, hey? Yeah, okay. Well, welcome to my talk about financial advisors adopting Bitcoin. I am a financial planner. My practice is roughly 10 years old now, and I have been practicing working with clients in Bitcoin since 2016. A lot of my clients are longtime hodlers, and what they found is that they still need financial planning. So unfortunately, Bitcoin's not a financial plan, but Bitcoin is definitely part of a financial plan. And so one of the things that I've been working towards is helping financial advisors adopt Bitcoin. Next slide, please. So the biggest issue is that financial advisors don't want to advise on this because they can't figure out a way to get paid. And so if financial advisors can't figure out a way to get paid, they're not going to want to do this at all. And so for me, how I figured this out is actually prior to even advising on Bitcoin, decided to go towards a flat fee model rather than being an assets under management model. And so right now, currently, advisors can advise on Bitcoin, but in order to get paid, they're only going to do so in what's called the ETF, the Exchange Traded Fund, and they're going to put it in client portfolios. And as we all know here, right, especially after the last talk, the best way to hold your Bitcoin is to hold your own keys and not to have an institution hold them, especially in ETF form. And so it creates a conflict of interest for advisors, right? They don't want to give clients access to Bitcoin outright if they can't figure out a way to be paid on it, and therefore clients are going to end up holding Bitcoin in a way that's not necessarily in their best interest. The second thing, though, is that they have to transition from how they're being paid currently from charging what assets they manage to charging something like a flat fee model. So currently in my practice, we charge a flat fee based on net worth, and that way Bitcoin is captured and there's no conflict of interest. If a client wants to hold Bitcoin outside of the assets that I manage, they can do so. And if a client wants to hold an ETF, they can also do that. And it doesn't matter to me, I get paid the same, and that's how I've eliminated conflicts of interest. The second thing, though, oh, great, look at this, woo! I think I went the wrong way, wait, hang on. Which way do I go? Uh-oh, I'm too far, though, I can't go back. Can you go back? Go back again. Okay, go forward. No, sorry, okay, I got it now. Okay, I won't hit it unless I absolutely need it. So, the next thing though, right, is once they've changed their fee model, they actually need to be able to advise on it confidently, and they need to be educated on what Bitcoin is. And so for a lot of advisors, right, they've got 150, 200, 300 clients that they're meeting with every single year, and they just don't have the time. And so they read one research paper that their company put out, and they're like, all right, I guess I know enough, and then they're gonna advise clients on it. That's not enough, right, for a client to go buy Bitcoin somewhere, then have their advisor help them, then have their advisor help them with self-custody, right? For the average person, one of the reasons why they hire a financial advisor or planner is to actually help them with all of these things. And if an advisor doesn't know how to do any of that, then they're going to have issues. And so education is really, really, really important. And the problem is that a lot of people like me get on stage and they say things like education is really, really important, but nobody actually ever ends up educating the financial advisors. And so we're in this sort of weird place where people like me want to advise and help financial advisors get educated, but also the venues in which financial advisors are being educated are actually not Bitcoin only. They tend to be more altcoin, S-coin oriented, and then they get all sorts of different education, right, which is not necessarily helpful to adopting Bitcoin and furthering our message. And so the number one thing though, right, is that when a client comes in and asks an advisor a question, the advisor needs to be able to speak confidently with that client. And if they can't speak confidently on the issues with their client, then they're not going to want to advise on it. And that's why we hear a lot of times just financial planners and advisors saying, well, Warren Buffett says don't invest in what you don't understand, and therefore, well, we don't understand this, so let's not worry about this. And really, we need to understand this, right? And financial advisors especially need to understand this, because more and more clients are coming with questions, and financial advisors and planners just don't have the answers. The next thing after just being able to communicate properly about it is being able to guide the clients in their storage options, right? Being able to tell a client, okay, hey, how do you want to hold this? Do you want to use single sig, multi-sig? Is all of that too much? Do we need to think about using an institution? How are we going to do it? And then the last thing is just clients in general are always concerned about volatility. And so the advisor needs to be able to just address a client's concerns about what's going on in the markets at all the times, and making sure that the client understands that they're holding a long-term savings technology. This isn't something that they should be using as any kind of short-term savings where they're going to buy it, hold it for 6 months, and then go buy a boat or something with it, right? This is something where they're going to use it instead of, let's say, holding stocks or something else for the long term. And so being able to communicate that with clients properly, and also matching the client's risk tolerance and their individual needs with the actual portfolio, is what the advisor is there to do. And so if the advisor doesn't have all the proper education in order to do this, then they're not going to be able to further the message. So for a lot of advisors, it starts with why save money, right? It's all the reason why we're here. Why even save money to begin with? Holding money hedges against future uncertainty, right? The whole reason why we keep an emergency reserve or any kind of cash around is that we want to make sure that we're able to meet any kind of needs that might come up. But we don't currently have a long-term way of doing that, right? We currently have short-term ways of storing fiat assets to be able to provide, let's say, for any kind of short-term uncertainty that comes up, but Bitcoin really fills that gap for long-term future uncertainty. And so advisors need to be able to communicate with clients that, we've been using stocks and other things like this to help mitigate long-term future uncertainty. However, it's not necessarily the right asset to do that some of the time, right? Sometimes maybe you want to hold some stocks, but a lot of the time you just want to hold money. And money is going to be the thing that actually hedges against future uncertainty. And it's going to provide the most flexibility to actually have money, right? In the future, we are all hoping that we're just going to use Bitcoin, right? We're not going to go to the store and take a share of Apple and sell it and then go use our fiat to go buy something, right? That doesn't make any sense. You want to just be able to go use your sats, go buy your coffee, go buy your kids a sandwich, whatever it is that you need, right? And you want to be able to know that you have money there to do that. So holding money rather than investments actually provides you with more flexibility and optionality. And then the last, right, is that we all want to have that to create our desired lifestyle. And Bitcoin is one of the ways that we can do that, both in the present and in the future. And so, as we all know, holding an inflationary currency is problematic, and that we want to hold something that will appreciate in value over time rather than by design lose value over time. And that long-term savings is just not synonymous with investment. There are so many risks that we take by buying bonds and stocks that are simply not there with Bitcoin. And it's really, really important that financial advisors and really anyone is able to communicate this of why you would want to hold long-term savings over holding an asset that has just inherent risks in it, whether it just be market risk from the market fluctuating and everything going on in the economy, or just systematic risk of holding an individual company. A stock is not a replacement for long-term savings, even though the whole world is constantly telling us that it is. Investing also requires time, energy, and talent. And most people don't have the time, energy, or the talent to be doing it, unfortunately. Myself included, right? I run a financial planning practice, and people ask me all the time, what are your best stock picks? And that's just not what we do. I don't even have time to do that in my practice. What I spend my time on is working with clients on financial planning and controlling the things that we can control. And so if somebody like me who's an investment professional doesn't even have the time, energy, and talent for it, how can the average person possibly have the time, energy, and talent to be picking a portfolio of 50 different stocks that they think is going to outperform over the long run? And lastly, it's just that investing may not be profitable enough to justify the risk. And so a lot of people think, oh, well, if I invest, then of course, I'm going to, have money later on, and that's just not necessarily the case. You have to pick the right things to invest in order to ensure that you are profitable in the future, and maybe it just makes sense to hold an index fund, and that's why a lot of these things now do exist, is because people simply can't outperform the market. And that brings us to Bitcoin, right? So why pick Bitcoin over altcoins? And this is really controversial, I would say, in the financial planning space because what I've seen happen, at least, is that financial advisors and planners went from no Bitcoin, it's tulips, it's a bubble, it's crazy, it's ephemeral, like how could you possibly hold that, to let's buy all of these altcoins. These are great, these are new software projects, they're so exciting. I'll get my client involved in this because we already missed the Bitcoin boat, And that's simply not the case, obviously. We're still very, very early in Bitcoin, and it's still super important to be able to distinguish the difference between why Bitcoin is there is no second best, right? Why Bitcoin is the one, and why altcoins are really not going to succeed in the long run. And so we want Bitcoin, right, because it provides the three functions of money, and the code is opting for stability and reliability. It's not opting for, whatever game or app or something that somebody is interested in. It's opting for making sure that our money is there over the long term. It has the only known money supply that's actually auditable, right? You can go and look at the code and see what it is and see how many there are going to be and how many are going to be distributed over time. And we have a supply cap, right, which can't be changed. It's been tried to be changed, it hasn't been able to be changed, whereas all these other altcoins, they're just not doing that, right? They're providing apps in coin format, they're opting for innovation, which often makes them centralized. There's no known monetary policies that you can audit in any of these, and generally no supply caps on any of them. And when they have come out with supply caps, they generally change them. And so it's just not something that you can rely upon to be a long-term savings vehicle. Whoops, uh-oh. Sorry, can you go back one? I went too far. Hello? Excuse me, can you go back one slide? Sorry. Thank you. Okay, there's also technological trade-offs to holding, let's say, Bitcoin versus other things. And really, just in general, right, any coin is going to have these technological trade-offs, and this is something that's really important to communicate, is that you want, you want decentralization above all things. Because if we have decentralization, that's what keeps our money secure. And so then we have to play with, okay, how are we gonna work on speed and cost? And so if we're optimizing for speed and decentralization, then cost is going to sacrifice. If we're going to optimize for speed and cost, then something is all of a sudden going to become centralized, right? And if we're going to optimize for just in general, right, if we want cost and decentralization, now all of a sudden things are going to slow down. So it's just a triangle that we need to keep in mind. And I think often it needs to be communicated because people want all of these things all of the time, and it's simply not possible, right? There's trade-offs in everything, and we just have to sacrifice one for another, but maybe not so much, right? Maybe we can use the Lightning Network to help with speed. That way we can prioritize decentralization and cost. Okay, so the next thing that financial advisors really need to know, because this is our job, is how much Bitcoin should people own? I get this question all the time, how much Bitcoin should I own? And it depends, right? It's one of those questions where I wish I could answer it. I wish I could just say, oh yeah, for you, I don't know anything about you, but 25%. And for you, I know nothing either, but you're 50%. I actually can't tell you that without knowing your specific situation. That's what we do as fiduciaries, is we spend time with our clients and we assess what's called their risk tolerance. So we spend time learning about their ability to take risk, which is just like how much money they have, how much savings they have, how stable their job is, how much they know about Bitcoin, what they understand about the technology, what is their time horizon, how long are they willing to hold it, versus willingness, which is what I think most people think of when they think of risk tolerance. Willingness is like, oh, am I a skydiver? Do I like to go gambling? Like to do all these high risk activities? Do I not mind when Bitcoin goes up and down, 85% in a day, So generally people prioritize willingness, but actually ability is much more important. If you've got negative net worth, right, and you're living paycheck to paycheck and your job is really unstable, then Bitcoin's not going to be the best place for you to hold your money, right? Because if you have something short-term come up, you can't meet any kind of short-term needs should the price go down. And so these are something to think about and that financial advisors need to communicate. And same thing with time horizon. So the longer amount of time that you have before you need this money, the more likely you can hold Bitcoin, or more likely you can hold more Bitcoin than you otherwise would. And lastly, which I think is very different than, is really the understanding of the technology. So often we ask people like, how long have they been investing? What do they know about markets and so forth? And that plays into risk tolerance. But Bitcoin obviously is different, right? Bitcoin's not an investment, Bitcoin is savings. And so do people understand what they're holding? And generally, the more they understand it, the more they've gone down that rabbit hole, the more likely they can take these larger positions where they're literally maybe even just sitting in Bitcoin and nothing else, and they've got a short-term fiat reserve just in case something comes up. Uh-oh. Okay, I think I went too far though, sorry. Oh no, I didn't, okay, go forward one, sorry, I got it. I should have numbered these, huh? Okay, so how to hold it, right, is also very important. So if an advisor is going to advise a client on how to to buy Bitcoin, and then the client goes and buys Bitcoin, and then the client comes back and says, but it's sitting on Coinbase or River or wherever it's sitting, or Swan. What do I do now? And then if the advisor doesn't know, all of a sudden we got a big problem, right? And so advisors really need to understand not your keys, not your Bitcoin, right? We can't keep it on exchanges. You can't sit there with your Bitcoin like you can, let's say, with your fiat assets, where you go to, let's say, a custodian or a brokerage firm like Charles Schwab, and you go and buy your Apple, and then it sits there. It's very different with Bitcoin, right? We can't do that. And so advisors need to be educated on whether or not, like, what single sig and multi-sig are, how it works, how to help a client do it. In our firm, what we do is we actually, we handhold with our clients. So some clients are up on it because, they're at conferences like these and they know what's happening. But a lot of people, right, the average person, one of the reasons why they come to a financial advisor is so that the financial advisor can actually help them with this. And so we talk about the trade-offs of why you would want to hold single sig versus multi-sig. We spend time with them actually doing a test transaction so that they can see, oh, look, my small amount of Bitcoin is moving from here to my hardware wallet. Okay, now I feel comfortable moving more. And deciding whether or not single sig or multi-sig is right for them. I would say for most people, multi-sig is going to work out better, just because there's less single points of failure. But that said, right, single sig is really easy and is a good way to start. And to just only need to keep track of one hardware wallet and one seed plate is really much better. The last thing I would say, which is going to be totally foreign to financial advisors but very native to Bitcoiners, is putting your seed on metal plates and things like that. I mean, a financial advisor's never done anything like that before, and it seems like probably the most paranoid thing that they've ever heard. Whereas this is kind of day-to-day activities that we do with clients, is making sure that not only do they have their Bitcoin stored properly, but they've also backed up their seed. They have a metal plate. They know how to use their metal plate. They're storing it in a good place, and that they're using, just proper. That they're also letting their family members know where these things are should something happen. Trusted family members, obviously, so that your Bitcoin's not just lost, right? Because at the end of the day, I would hate for people to have to work so hard to save all this Bitcoin. They do the right thing. They move it onto a hardware wallet, and then they don't even let anybody know where it is. And then, God forbid, something happens, and you don't have the chance to tell people where your Bitcoin is. So I think this is a huge value add in the financial planning space. I know for our clients it has been. People come to us sometimes only for this because, even though there's a lot of information out there, sometimes people just want a friendly face to come and help them with their Bitcoin. Okay. The next thing is leaving Bitcoin to others. So it's kind of, I would say, part of how we hold Bitcoin is part of the conversation. But really, and this doesn't necessarily, I don't know the rules in El Salvador, but I do work in the US. Bitcoin is a probate asset in the US. So what that means is that after you die, your Bitcoin would actually be administered in the courts. Even if you left it, let's say, in your will, you would have, the government basically looks through your documents, you have a lawyer that gets involved, and they distribute the assets according to how your will is. If you don't have a will, obviously it's even worse. It's dying intestate is what that means. And the government basically starts finding family members and deciding who gets what, and it takes a very, very long time. And so depending on what state you live in or how it works in your country, you might want to consider talking to an attorney or so forth about the best way to pass your Bitcoin should something happen to you. And again, multi-sig is going to play a huge role in this, because what we've found for clients is that if they have multi-sig, they can give one of their keys to somebody without them actually having custody of those assets, and they know that there's a plan in place, and then that person could then go and administer the trust or the will or the estate however it's supposed to be. Another thing is in the US, and I'm sorry, I don't know how it works here in El Salvador, but in the US we have retirement accounts. There are ways to now hold Bitcoin in retirement accounts. You can actually hold Bitcoin outright in retirement accounts in the US. And there you would actually just leave a beneficiary, which is kind of nice because that passes outside the state and could just go directly to your descendants or to your heirs, whoever it was you want to leave it to. Okay, the last thing I would say that's really important is that, and why advisors are kind of shy about Bitcoin, is the regulation. And so I think this slide actually used to be more important prior to the election in the US. It's possible that all of this, or some of it, gets thrown out now that Donald Trump has been elected in the United States. But this is just some of the tax regulation changes that were coming down the pipeline in 2025. It's yet to be seen whether or not all of them will be implemented. Some of them, though, I think are just going to happen because they're just kind of reasonable. For instance, like detailed record keeping, right? They want people to maintain records. I don't think that's going to change in the US no matter who's president. They always want people to maintain their records. I think that even if you're not in a jurisdiction like the US where they're not asking you to maintain records, it's actually to your benefit to be maintaining these records anyways. That way you know when you purchase Bitcoin, how much you purchased it for, what it's worth now, right? All of these things are really important to have. What I see sometimes happen is that people in the Bitcoin community like to, let's say, like buy $1 a day, you know, or something like that, and then the record keeping becomes very, very complicated when you do things like that. So generally, I recommend not buying $1 a day if you can, or even waiting to buy $7 a week if you're going to do that. That way, just from a record keeping standpoint, you have less lots to keep track of, especially in the US, since in 2025, they are going to make sure that you have these things in place. And they're probably going to do it at the custodian level. So obviously, you know, if you go find a friend and you buy Bitcoin from him, or you're mining or whatever you're doing, and you get some non-KYC Bitcoin, it's less applicable. But in a place like River, Coinbase, Swan, any of these places, they're actually going to require more detailed record keeping there. There's just going to be increased IRS oversight is what it seems like in general coming down the pipeline. Again, that might be changed with Donald Trump being elected. I don't necessarily know. They're trying to get reporting for people who are compensated in Bitcoin. Right now, the reporting's kind of murky, and I think, like, you know, IRS, they're probably going to be a little lenient because they're not necessarily sure what's going on. But now what they're looking to be doing in 2025 is reporting wages with their USD value at the time of receipt. So these are some of the things that I think probably are going to stay, even though, like, things are changing. That said, some of these things I think are up for grabs. The one thing I would say is that if you are in the US and you are, let's say, holding Bitcoin for a long period of time, and all of a sudden you're noticing your net worth is increasing, you can take advantage of gift tax reporting, where you can gift your family members $18,000 a year worth of Bitcoin tax-free. And that's a good way to start moving things out of your estate earlier. And again, this is something that financial planners and advisors would be aware of and want to help advise their clients on. Okay, is there any questions? I don't know. I kind of sped through that, but I'm happy to take one. Yeah.
IRS before they come after you. Like the gentleman, I can't remember, he created a fork in Bitcoin, and they extradited him from Spain.
Oh, okay.
Actually, like 40 million was...
Yeah, okay, so generally in the US, there's what's called a IRS payment plan. So if you're on back taxes, generally $50,000 or less, they'll put you on a payment plan. So if you owe $50,000 or less, it's probably not worth their time, I would say. If you're going to owe more than $50,000 worth in taxes, I would imagine that they would go after you for that. $50,000 worth in taxes, though, it is obviously it's a lot of money. But if you think about it in Bitcoin terms, right, it's like, okay, if you bought, let's say you were one of the first people to buy Bitcoin, you bought Bitcoin for $1, and then you sold it today for 90 grand, right? Now all of a sudden you've got a huge capital gain. You've got $89,999 in capital gains. And that would be obviously taxable, that value. However, if you bought, let's say, at 50 grand and you're selling at 90 grand today, right? Now you're under the limit. This is not me advising you not to pay your taxes. But I would say that, there's some wiggle room, but that said, having detailed record keeping is going to be important for that. And I would just say in general, you could set aside a savings for taxes when you're taking capital gain events. Also, in this specific example, let's say where you bought at 50K, but you sold at 90K, depending on how much other income you have in the US, you might not actually owe taxes on that. So there's actually from 0 to, I think it's 42 grand now because they keep changing it. From 0 to 42 grand, if you're a single person in the United States, you actually don't owe taxes on those capital gains if you don't have other income. Let's say you had another 20 grand in income. Now all of a sudden 20 grand of that wouldn't apply, and now you would owe capital gains tax on another 20 grand. So there's some wiggle room, and there's also standard deductions and other things and deductions you can take on your taxes. So I would say it's not so clear and cut what your question is, but I hope that helps. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not an expert in Bitcoin trusts and estates outside of the US. That said, what I think would be important would be to understand the rules in your state of what happens, or in your country of what happens should something happen to you. And so once you know that, let's say, okay, the government gets involved in a way that I don't like, or it takes a really, really long time, and it's going to take a really long time for my heirs to get access to my funds, then I would say that's when a trust would apply. It's just like how meddlesome the government might be, or maybe you owe taxes on estate depending on where you live. Like they might actually like take money away from your estate, but if you don't have it in a trust, that would be another reason why to put it in. Or the state just takes so long to actually process things that you want to make sure it passes through a trust to your heirs more quickly. That would be another thing. The other thing would be if you are worried about family members, let's say, arguing over your wealth, a trust is kind of more set in stone, rather than like if it does go through the court system, usually family members can petition about whether or not they're owed money or why they would be owed money, and then the court would have to hear everything, and maybe at the end of the day, the people you don't want to inherit things might still not actually inherit anything. But with a trust, it's definitely more set in stone because it never goes through the government. What happens is that the person who is the trustee of the trust actually administers the trust according to what's in the trust document. So that's the advantage, I would say, of holding Bitcoin in a trust rather than just holding it outright. The other thing I will say is that if you're married, I know this is in the US and I'm sure it applies just in countries in general. In the US, there's no way for you to buy it jointly. So if you're married to a spouse, usually it's the husband that goes and buys Bitcoin, and then the wife is like, okay, well, my husband has it, I'll get it at some point. In the US, that's probate, and it would still actually have to go through the process to leave it to your spouse. Whereas if you had it in like some sort of jointly titled account or a trust where you were both trustees, now all of a sudden your spouse has immediate access to these funds that they otherwise wouldn't have. And so I think Bitcoiners often say, well, I have it in a hardware wallet and it's in my house, so who cares? Is often what I get from people. Like, it doesn't matter, it's beyond the state. But if for whatever reason you have to bring these assets back into the system for whatever reason, all of a sudden there's going to be questions about where your descendants or your heirs or your spouse got this money. And so I do think it's still important to do things within the rules. Okay. All right, thank you so much.